Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Well, welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Kathy Caprino, who's a top-ranked career and leadership coach, senior Forbes contributor, TEDx speaker, LinkedIn influencer, and host of the Finding Brave podcast, as well as a best-selling author. And her latest book, The Most Powerful You, The 7 Brave Paths to Building Career of Your Dreams, is going to be the topic for today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, Kathy.
Thank you so much for having me, Charles. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. I always like to ask the first question is to give our listeners more insight about you. Tell us more about your background and what got you passionate about having your mission to be supporting the advancement and success of women in business around the globe?
All right, I'll try to make it brief. It's long-winded, but I'll keep it short. I had an 18-year corporate career in marketing and publishing and membership services. And on the outside, it seemed very successful. Managed global initiatives, made a lot of money, supported a lot of cool projects, but truly on the inside, it was not successful. And I would say that I faced a lot of bumps through my 18 years of working, but I didn't quite recognize what those were till they turned into full-blown crises when I hit 40. What do I mean by that? Sexual harassment, gender discrimination, toxic colleagues, narcissistic bosses, zero work-life balance, chronic illness. I had something called tracheitis, an infection of the trachea. Who's ever heard of such a thing? Every 3 months for 4 years. And here I am, a singer and a speaker. It was pretty devastating, and I would get very sick. But worse than all that was waking up every day thinking, is this the work I'm going to do for my life? Because it felt meaningless. It felt like it was lacking contributive value. And that starts to get more important for many people as they hit 40. But I tried to figure it out and I couldn't. And back then, there really weren't career coaches like there are now. I took a battery of assessment tests for $1,000 and the guy came out and said, "Well, looks good. Looks like you're in the right field." And I literally wanted to poke my eye out with a stick. Like, what do you mean? I'm really unhappy. So I did nothing. I didn't make a move until 9/11, and I was kind of promised the moon. Buy the biggest house you can because you have a long career, and 1 month after moving into that house was 9/11, and 1 month after I was laid off. And, anyone who's been laid off or fired, it's pretty much a traumatizing experience for many. But in my case, it was that breakdown moment where I said, "That's it. I've had it. I cannot repeat this. I cannot return to this life." But I didn't know what was wrong and what was missing. But I did become a therapist, which was a life-changing experience. And then I found coaching. And what I would notice is when on my calendar there'd be a mid to high level professional woman coming, usually depressed, usually anxious, confused, I lit up. Not that I want them to be unhappy, but there was a shortcut about how to help women. So now it's been 17 years of working with over 20,000 women across 6 continents, which I'm very proud of. And there is a passion there. I've said that if I can help one woman a day, and men are included in that, I have great male clients as well. But truly, if I can help one woman a day bypass those challenges that I faced, it's a good day. So that's where it came from.
I love that. Such a powerful message. And part of your book, the new book, The Most Powerful You, is you've done that research and you've identified that key missing ingredient, right? That what the question that you mentioned in the book is what is missing from the lives of these working women who feel that they can't experience joy, success, and rewards and impact they deserve and want. And from your research, there were two missing ingredients that you found pretty common among those, correct?
That's it. And I said that, I would say now this is 5 or 6 years ago. I said, what's going on here? What is going on that no matter where they call from, no matter what country, no matter what socioeconomic level, education, what field, they're bringing the same problems? How is this possible? And yes, I said, I got to answer the 2 questions. What are they coming for help for? And what are they getting in the coaching process that's creating breakthrough? And that's about my favorite word in the English language. I don't want to just be a talking head and limp along. It's breakthrough. And the two things were bravery. They were missing the bravery to face head on what isn't working and take accountability to change it. But the truth is, Charles, bravery ain't enough. It's power that we need to be our own change agent, to be the author of our own lives. And that's where it got me down a happy rabbit hole of what is power. And I found out after the book came out, I wish I'd done this research before that. Women tend to, now I don't mean to paint all women with the same brush or all men. That's the last thing I meant to do. But the research has shown, and I've done LinkedIn polls about that. And I have a big following there. And so I get a lot of votes on these polls. Women said to me, I don't want power. And I said, what do you mean? What do you want? And they said, impact, positive difference. I want to be known for someone who's being inspiring. I said, I hate to break it to you, but you need power for that. So, what I realized in this journey is many women are socialized and programmed and trained to shun power because we've been on the receiving end of being under the thumb of power. And for many women, power is abusive, it's harsh, it's critical. It's not what they tend to want. The word is not what they want. So I'm trying to educate and change people's views that, as Shakespeare said, nothing is but thinking makes it so. Power is nothing in and of itself, it's how it's wielded. And we can be gentle and compassionate and spiritual and be extremely powerful.
When I love when you talk about power, you're not referring to the power over someone to force them to do something. Instead, you change that definition. I'd love for you to provide that for our listeners, because you're right, it can be perceived the wrong way. If you say, well, you want more power, and that power then can be used perhaps abusively, right? Or for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I'm really defining it as the ability to make changes in your own life that you want, and also to be able, when we rise, we can help other people rise. And if we stay disempowered or powerless, it's very difficult to help other people rise. So, how we define it, that can have a myriad of definitions. But I know that sometimes, and I've had to learn this all the hard way. I mean, if you read my book, you know my story that my beloved parents are in heaven, but mom, Greek mom, strong, fierce, and taught me to be a warrior in some ways. But mom knows this because I got her permission to say it. Thank you, mom. I couldn't challenge her. So I grew up into adulthood not being able to say, I don't agree or no. My boundaries, part of power is boundaries. My boundaries were not well formed. Even I saw this at age 41 when I started my master's degree. Even if I raised my hand to ask a question that was a little challenging of the professor, I'd be scared at 41. I've got a lot of help. I've had a lot of help to overcome this. But my overall point here is, there are 7 damaging power gaps, 7 ways that we are not powerful. And these overlap with confidence, they overlap with imposter syndrome. I've done a lot of, research on this, and some studies say that 75% of executive women experience imposter syndrome, which in the way it was studied was that women feel that no matter what level they're at, they didn't really deserve it. They were in the right place at the right time, or it was luck. If you believe these things, what's going to happen here is from the get-go, from the minute out of the gate in your profession, you are not advancing as you deserve to. You're leaving money on the table. You're leaving leadership opportunities on the table. So, yeah, the 7 gaps, that's how I've decided to break this down so people could understand, what is she talking about here about power?
The 7 gaps you mentioned, which is surprising to me that you discovered from your research, over 98% of respondents indicated that they experience at least one of these 7 power gaps, and 75% say they experience 3 or more, which is surprising to me how prevalent these are. And when you talk about power gaps, you really look at these as challenges, right? These gaps that widen and stretch with time that can lead to a loss that we need most in order to succeed in life.
That's right. Like, I call it a gap because ever see a crack on in the road or on the sidewalk? It's where our energy and our self-confidence and our self-trust and our belief in ourselves and our ability to be resilient and our ability to, failure is a word that, my goodness, is probably used more than any other word maybe. It's a way to look at your failures without being crushed down by them. It's mindset, it's how we think about ourselves, how we relate to others. But yeah, they're gaps because unless we first of all, you have to recognize you have them, which is it can be a stretch for many people. On the other hand, I have a power gap survey and people are saying yes, 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 yes. A lot of people have 6 or 5 or 7. But it is like, energy seeping out, energy and confidence. And until you close that gap, you're going to really not. The whole point is that you're not going to reach your highest and happiest potential. That's it.
Well, in those 7 gaps, I'll just quickly kind of give a brief overview of those, and then I'd like to go into a few of those. We won't have time to unpack all of them, but they're all in your great book. Number 1 is not recognizing your special talents, abilities, and accomplishments. Number 2 is communicating from fear, not strength. Number 3 is reluctance to ask for what you deserve. 4 is isolating from influential support. 5 is acquiescing instead of saying stop to mistreatment. 6 is losing sight of your thrilling dream. And then number 7, the final one, is allowing past trauma to shape and define you. And what I love about your book, Kathy, is that the way it's laid out, because before you introduce each gap, you identified the percent of respondents in your survey that are affected by this. So you can kind of have a gauge on which ones are more common. And then the framework you lay out, very actionable framework. You give an example of someone who is experiencing this gap, either from a coaching client or someone you know. And then you kind of walk them through, what are your internal evaluations that you need to make to give you more awareness? What are some of the external actions you can take to overcome it? And then how do we redefine it, have that positive reframe? So that's, to me, a great approach that you've taken in laying out the framework for this book.
Thank you, Charles. I can tell you read it. I really appreciate it. A lot of people who come for coaching will say, "How come I'm still struggling with this? I've taken, 20 LinkedIn learning courses, not to cast aspersion on, but, I've read 42 self-help books. Why? Why? Why?" And the reason I learned as a therapist, insight is great, but insight doesn't change our lives typically. It's action, but not any kind of action, just any kind. It's a different kind of action than you've ever taken in your life. That's what we need, and I think coaching helps with that, therapy too. But when I think back on the 3 years of the master's degree as a therapist, there may be a handful of learnings that instantly, when you hear something and you're forever changed. I had a few of those, and one of them was the idea of a reframe, that when we're stuck, when we're unhappy, when we're confused, typically it's how we're approaching it, how we're thinking about it. And the positive reframe is taking that challenge and reframing it so that it fits the facts equally well. We don't want to lie, we don't want to embellish and not face the facts. But in the way you're thinking of it, it allows for more hope and expansion and positivity and growth. And that's why I thought the reframe part of the book is important. I'd love to give an example if I could, Charles. Sometimes people will come to me, look, I've interviewed 50 times or 30 times, and I get to the last round and then I don't get it. And then they think to themselves, they may not say these words, but they think, I'm a loser, clearly. I'm not valuable. I'm not wanted. I'm not. And I will always say, now hang on here. Of all those jobs, how many did you really want? And often they didn't want any of those jobs. They're doing it because they're desperate. They won't need money. We understand these reasons, but that's not the job they want. And so I say to them, you're not a loser. Your system is operating under the internal understanding you don't want to be employed there. You don't want that job and you're not going to get it. So once you can have a reframe like that, it makes you see the whole challenge extremely differently, and you're not the loser in the story. It's usually things are happening for a reason that you're not actually aware of.
what you just did, which I love. That's, that insight that you provide in the book as well, to say, let's think about this differently. Let's have a different paradigm shift, perspective change that really might cause you to question whether or not you really want that to begin with. So
That's absolutely it. Wasn't it Einstein, I believe, who said, you cannot solve a problem on the level of consciousness that created it? Well, we can't really have a shift in consciousness too easily on our own. So I think that's why outside perspective is so, so important. We can't really do a lot of this major growth work all alone and in a vacuum.
that's why everyone needs a coach, a mentor, and really needs that outside support. Love to get into some of these power gaps. And the first one I love to talk about is the reluctance to ask for what you deserve and want. And why do you think so many women, because I've seen this before as well from my experiences from talking to a lot of female leaders, why is it so difficult for so many women to find it hard to ask for what they want and deserve?
I love to talk about this. And, you're talking about statistics. What is this number? 77% said they have this gap. I mean, these are staggering numbers. And I do want to say, I used to do market research at some point in my career, and sometimes there are self-fulfilling prophecies. Your pool of research, you have to be careful that it's diverse and it isn't self-selected, right? So I knew that the number was high because I see it every day in coaching. But when I did the survey, and these are people that don't know me, I don't know them, all over the world, and these numbers are coming forth. But the answer to this question, do we have 3 hours? But I need to share that we don't come out of the gate with these challenges. So I hope everyone can hear this, with an open mind, what I'm about to say. In the corporate world, in the business world, it's a patriarchal world. I do not mean to bash men. Men have been some of my top sponsors and supporters. But if you look, I think the number is something like 28% still only are Fortune 500 CEOs who are women. I believe that's the number now. So it's still very male dominated. And, in my podcast, Finding Brave, I've interviewed a lot of men who are helping us understand what being trained in a masculinity is today. And, patriarchy hurts both men and women. But what I want to share here is, in a patriarchal world, if you split yourself in half and you think what masculine is versus what feminine is, and I'm saying this in quotes, these are rigid gender stereotypes, but masculine typically means get it done, confident, take no prisoners, not vulnerable, not weak, not emotional. I mean, listen to my voice. Whereas feminine, soft, malleable, pleasing, accommodating, puts other people first, isn't the squeaky wheel. Well, in that frame, you can understand how a woman would be, and again, I'm being careful. There's a lot of variation within genders. Uh, but people who've been trained that it's not feminine to do these things, it's going to be very difficult, number one, to recognize when you deserve to ask, when you feel worthy to ask for something, for what you want, for what you deserve. And often the presentation's gonna be a little flawed. I mean, what we have to do, going straight to the strategy, is you have to build a case, and it's not emotional. If you want to rise, if you want advancement, if you want a promotion, there's a case to be built, and it's factual, and it's data, but we're not trained, Charles. We're not trained to do it. And, there was one study years ago that I still think holds true, that right out of business school, 57% of men were negotiating their salary, the very first job they ever, and 7% of women. Well, right then and there, we're already behind. Behind who? Behind men, behind our highest self, behind what we could be doing. So there are reasons for every one of these gaps. They didn't just happen. But what are we going to do? Sit back and say, well, I'm like this. I can't change. We can change. I know because I've had every one of these gaps. And, it's still a process, but I've overcome them.
Well, and you mentioned in the book too that there's a strange flip side to this power gap, that when girls become women, many of the women push off the society's limiting views of the feminine and start achieving great and remarkable things. and they become more reluctant to admit vulnerability because they found it so hard to overcome it to begin with. So now there are these high achievers, right? And they're succeeding in very powerful ways, and they don't ever want to feel vulnerable again.
And what happens there? Then, this is a stereotype I don't love to put a highlight on, but people, even the media, have asked me talk about why there are so many queen bee is this syndrome where some women get to a very high level and they're not opening doors for other women. Now, I've been in the workforce a long time, and that was really more true back when there were very few opportunities that women were going to be able to land. So once you did the work to land it, often you were reluctant to open the door for others. I, Happily, I think that's changing, but I don't think it's changed to the degree we want it to. And I think the reality is if we're afraid to be vulnerable, if we're afraid to be honest, if we're afraid to really tell a story that is true about how we're feeling, and, we're really doing a disservice to ourselves and others. I think, I've written an article in Leader to Leader magazine about what leaders can do to help professionals, employees overcome these gaps. I mean, one of those things they can do is allow for more honesty and more sharing of the struggles people have. Make it a workplace where people can be who they really are and bring their whole selves to work.
The number one thing I hear from people saying they don't want to appear weak, that they need some assistance or support, that they feel like, okay, I'm not strong enough to handle it on my own. You deserve help from others. And that's the way I kind of frame it, like what you do in your book. I mean, if you doubt you deserve it, then take some time this week to pay it forward. Great advice, Kathy. I love that, what you say, because that offers you that different perspective and on how good it feels and how much it means to them. And it's not a sign of weakness.
Oh, love this point. I mean, I will say this unequivocally. I don't think I know anyone who has done something that I admire, including myself, that didn't get help from somebody else to do it. Everything from our podcast to our book to speaking in front of 1,000 people, you didn't get that on your own, pretty much. Somebody found you, someone recommended you, someone heard that podcast. So, why is it that we think we can have what we want and not get help? Now, I understand running my own business, you know, sometimes when things are bumpy, we don't want to admit it. We don't want it to go public or, gosh, I had a hard year after COVID, which I did, in my business. I understand sometimes we don't want to wear the heart completely on our sleeve, but it is a sign of strength. It's a sign of confidence. It's a sign of resilience. And it's a sign of self awareness that you ask for help. And if you don't, I'd ask you to look at what gaps you have that make you think, I can't tell anyone about this, or I don't need any help. We need it.
When I love the quote that you put in the book, that, or the statement that you put in the book toward the end of this power gap, is realize that there are people waiting in the wings to be your angel in your life to support your highest growth and happiest success. That's such a reassuring statement for many people that they really need to have that sink in, I believe.
I love that. I love that you would pull that out. I think there are angels in a lot of dimensions, frankly, but if we just stay on this platform, I think that there are people waiting to help us. And if we think about it, there are people who have offered help and we were not in an open place to accept it. So just go back and look at your emails from the past year. Who has said, I'd love to help you? Or, wow, I had that problem, Kathy. Or, boy, I'd love to talk to you about it. I think we sometimes have blinders on about that.
Let's move to the next gap that I wanted to focus on, because this is another area, a gap, a chasm for a lot of female leaders and for leaders of all, of either sex, and that's the power connection. But there is a real difference here in gender because, as you mentioned in the book, women on average have 3 times as many mentors as men, but men have twice as many sponsors. Perhaps unpack the difference between those two and why you think that is.
Yeah, what an interesting finding. I was pretty shocked when I saw that. So, unpacking this, when we differentiate mentors and sponsors, and I know you know all of this, you know, in depth, but for those who might be wondering, mentors, in my view, are people in your sphere who you have already demonstrated your potential to, who are happy to help you, who they might be at your job, they might be in your field, they might be outside of your field, or they're a top entrepreneur who is 10 steps ahead of you. And there's one aspect even different from that, that's role model. Now, we can have a role model who's a biblical figure or an action star. They don't have to be in your life, they don't even have to be alive, but there's someone who inspires you. So there's role model, there's mentor, and then there's sponsor. In my view, the sponsor can serve the same function, that they're there to support you, they're there to give you feedback and guidance, but they have one difference. They are powerful. They are able to open doors that you cannot open. They're able to be in a room that you're not in, and they're able to say, "Hey, that Charles, wow, he did something. I talked to him the other day, and I think he'd be perfect for this next project or, the promotion or whatever." What's interesting is, and I interviewed Ivan Meisner in my Forbes blog quite some time ago, the founder of BNI, the business networking organization that I think is the largest in the country. And we talked about being in the same room and being it with people who can help you. And that he even talked about how to network up to your idols when you're in a conference or you have an opportunity to speak on Zoom with them. What and other people have shared with me, Judy Robinette, who's written some great books, and she's really a sponsor of mine. She wrote a book on how to be a power connector, and she's talked about how women are comfortable mostly when they're in the same room with people at the same level as them, that they're not as comfortable reaching up to those who have power. And I see it. I see it constantly. Like, remember when we had lunch and learns and the CEO would come and present, and we still have them on Zoom or online or, on other platforms. But I used to say to my clients, okay, you've got one coming up. Where are you going to sit in the room when the president, male or female, sits at the head of the table? And they laugh and say, I'm going to sit in the farthest corner I can. I'm like, "No, you're not. You're gonna sit next to the president." And I don't mean in a brown nosy way. I mean, why wouldn't you? And then after they present, hopefully it's an inspiring presentation or talk or where the company's going, you're gonna ask them a question. And, if you can't think of one, okay, that we'll have to work on that, but you could walk up to them and say, "That was really inspiring. And this was the thing that stood out." So you're demonstrating your thought leadership. You're not just saying, "I loved it," right? And then you might wanna ask a question. "Hey, I was really wondering, how do we go about expanding DEI when this is the situation we have," etcetera. Hopefully, if they're an open person and a generous person, they'd say, "You know what? I'm walking to get some coffee," or, "I don't have time now, but I'd love to chat with you about it. Let's set up a quick call." Well, this is how you're demonstrating your potential. But women are uncomfortable with this, I think, because we're trained to be. We're trained, "You're not good enough, you're not smart enough, don't do that, don't sit next to the president." Whereas, and again, I don't mean to paint everyone with the same brush, men typically are looking more hierarchically from the minute they're born. If you look at sports, if you look at, who's best, what are the stats, who's got power. So I think it is certainly a gender issue.
You also, though, mentioned too that there's four barriers to getting powerful people or getting the support from influential individuals. And another aspect of it is the introversion of an individual, whether they be male or female. And that can really hurt them from seeking this out, whether it's connection, networking, because they feel like it's just too hard for them. They shy away from it.
Love this, love this. Now I'm an extrovert, although I'm getting more ambivertish as time goes on. After I do a big talk, I have to sleep and rest. And anyway, I think you're right that I started tallying of all the people who are coming to me for help. What percentage are introverts? And it's high. It's something like 70%. And I believe there's a reason for that. And I believe, as I wrote about in my Forbes blog, and I mentioned it in the book, I think that corporate America has a bias against introverts in some way because we don't understand introversion. And you're pointing out when I realized I had it was, my son's an introvert. And there was something that happened in his college course That's really struck me in one of his courses, that it was an extreme bias to all the extroverts in the room. And I thought back when I was a vice president, I had a lovely team and one woman was just amazing. But I'd notice when we'd have brainstorming meetings, okay, what new products, where do we want to go, what new directions? Other people would be like, oh, me, and that can be me, myself. Whereas she wouldn't offer anything. And I would think to myself, what's going on over there? She has so many good ideas. What's happening? But the next day she'd come with a list of amazing ideas. She just processed information differently. So, number one, I think we all should be really, really careful that we don't have this bias. So, write down what you think, everybody listening. What do I think an extrovert acts like, looks like, seems like? What do they do better? What do they do worse? And same for introverts. And make sure you don't have this bias. But I think the other part of your question was, please don't make the mistake of thinking that networking is an extroverted endeavor. I mean, I've interviewed Dory, Matthew, Pollard about this, several introverts. There's ways you can do it. And especially now that we're remote, not that remote work doesn't exhaust us and remote meetings of strangers, but you can do it the way that feels right to you. Don't think that networking is only an extrovert's pleasure and joy. Extroverts find it hard too, but we must do it. We must build a support community or we can't have what we want. We can't build what we want.
And you also provide some great tips on finding fabulous mentors and sponsors and making the most out of the help you receive. And I hear this a lot from individuals when they're reluctant to do so, is that they can't find the right words or the right approach. They're waiting for that perfect pitch to them, and that doesn't exist. There are no magic words, as you state, that's going to help you to find those mentors and sponsors. It's just getting out there and doing it and looking at it as what can you provide value to them in some way versus asking for something.
I love what you're picking out. I have to go back and read my book. It's been a while. I like what you're picking out. But yeah, people will say, "What do I say?" So Sheryl Sandberg in her book Lean In said about the bird that falls out of the nest and is looking for his mother. And he's going up to a crane and a skyscraper and a bulldozer. Are you my mother? You don't want to reach out to someone and say, will you be my mentor? I get that a lot on LinkedIn. You're going to hear no if we know nothing about you. Who are you? And why do you want mentorship from me? I need to know you. And hopefully you can demonstrate your potential before you make that reach. And one easy way is, here's another thing with LinkedIn. I literally can look at someone's profile and in 3 minutes I can tell if you're hiding, if you don't understand what your talents are, if you don't know how to talk about those talents. I can see it being right there. But get on LinkedIn if you're not. Fill out all of the aspects of it. My goodness, what is it? 930 million people? It's more every day. But what you can do is start following people that inspire you. Follow Charles, follow his podcast, listen to it, watch it on YouTube. But then share it. Take Charles's link, share it, and say something about what spoke to you, just like you're doing about my book. I could be interviewed by 100 people, and they're not going to mention the same quotes and information you're mentioning. So if you love it, share it, tag Charles, and say, this is what spoke to me about that podcast. Wow, thank you. And if the person has time and has that kind of nature, and maybe is a little extroverted, I don't know, I'm kidding. They might say, thank you, Fred. Thank you, Kathy. And they might want to connect with you. But do that kind of thing first before you reach out to someone who's not heard of you, who's someone who's 1,000 steps ahead of you. And be mindful that, you know, for instance, people on LinkedIn, I'm literally pitched 100 times a week, Charles. Will you do this? Can I pick your brain? I read an article once. Please don't ever say pick my brain, because it can be exhausting when you're hearing from a lot of, I don't mean to be unkind, but when you're hearing from a lot of people. So demonstrate your potential and your thought leadership first.
Just keeps reiterating that same theme that you're speaking to, is that don't ask for mentorship, follow their work, be of service, helpful, supportive to them, and put yourself in their shoes. when you're in a quandary about what to do, right? I mean, if the tables were turned, what would you feel if this person were asking you for help? So I think that's really an important perspective to have instead of just that self-serving perspective that just, you're out there, you want to connect and it's all about me.
There's one other quick point I want to make, though. So many people don't feel worthy. What could I give this other person? And what do they care about my thought leadership? I don't have any thought leadership. Well, this is where I'm saying become more powerful, become more confident. You absolutely have something to share and something to give this person, but you got to close your power gap thinking that you don't.
Absolutely. So critical. The next one is around brave service. This was, I think, the number one gap that most women experience, and it's losing sight of your thrilling dream for your life. What specifically makes us lose sight of that connection to our thrilling dreams?
So what it really refers to is, those who go to college or study something. Usually, when we're young, we have some dreams. I'm going to make a difference. I thought I was going to be a great editor of, authors' incredible fiction and change the world. And I bailed on that dream 6 weeks after graduating from college. Why do we bail? For all the reasons you can guess. I'm never going to make money in that dream. What was I thinking? This is harder. And right now, my goodness, it's hard to get jobs in some fields that are highly desirable. So they bail, forget it. I can't do it. They don't do the right work to demonstrate their potential that no, I don't have experience here, but here's what I'm going to bring. Alston Belsack is amazing in cultivatedculture.com in helping with that. But we bail because we don't think we have what it takes. We don't have the patience. We don't have the commitment. And we get scared and we say, well, forget it. I got to make some money here. And that was me. I have to tell this story quickly so no one will do what I did. Again, I wanted to be this great editor, right? Well, I sent out my resume on my Smith Corona typewriter and I took the very first job that was offered to me, marketing of science books and journals. Ah, now I'm good at that. My dad was a scientist. My sister's a scientist. I can do it. That doesn't mean that's what I should have done. And 2 weeks into it, I think it was, I got a letter from Simon& and Schuster. I'm forgetting which one, the one that I would have killed. And they said, "We have an assistant editor job. Assistant editor. Would you like to come in for an interview?" Now, what should you say to that? "Yes, I'll see you, like, in now." I said to myself, "I can't quit this job." It makes me cry. "Why can't you?" No, that's not great. It's not ideal. But if the job of your dreams comes your way, you're not even gonna go in interview? We bail. So I'm asking you people, don't bail. There's a reason you have the talents you have. They're gifts and they're special. And I need to say that we're all like that thumbprint. There is nobody on the planet that has your amalgam of gifts, talents, trials, tribulations, traumas, ancestral background. You're meant to use these talents. The world needs them desperately, desperately, desperately. So when you bail on that thrilling dream, you're depriving the world of your great gifts as well.
That's a great reason to uphold that dream. Many people, including myself, you become lost when you don't act upon it and you feel like, you need the money, you need the stability, but in reality, you're losing a part of yourself when you don't go with that. And you have the regrets later in life, right? And you don't want to have those regrets toward the end of your life. You want to make sure that you take action. What is your answer to the question? Because I get this question a lot. How do I find my passion?
You don't find your passion finds you. Your passion, I think was Maya Angelou said, it grabs you by the collar and it doesn't let go often. And it was someone else who said, often to the detriment of your checkbook, your relationships, your health, real passion, right? Wrapping your life around a passion. So I don't advocate that for everyone. I mean, I'm doing that and it can be rough sometimes. But what I'm saying here is a lot of people think, first of all, if they pursue their passion, they're going to go broke. Second, a lot of celebrities kind of say that too. One celebrity said, don't pursue your passion, do what you're good at. That makes me angry because I did what I was good at for 18 years and I was sick and miserable and there was sexual harassment and a million other things. No, You want the intersection of what you're good at and what you enjoy doing. Why would we only do the thing we're good at? So that's another thing. I'm getting worked up. We we often think that we should only pursue what we're good at, but we're good at a lot of things. So what I ask everybody to think about is, what do you want to do or do functionally? For whom and for what outcomes do you care about? Some of us want to work in a widget manufacturing company. Some of us want to work for nonprofits. Somebody wants to work in health, sustainability. What are the outcomes that you care about? And who do you want to serve? Why should we not be thinking about that? So I want everyone to understand, I don't mean quit your job and go sing in a band. I mean, I am a singer on the side. I don't mean that. I mean, start doing now. And that can be on the side, 2 hours a month, but start being that person you want to be. If you think you actually want to do therapeutic work, start shadowing a therapist and see if that's what you really want. If you love animals and think you want to start a rescue, go and volunteer at an animal rescue and live the reality of that profession. But the other thing you mentioned is, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Nonsense. I mean, work is work. Work is not play. That's my view. Now, my dad used to say, as long as you like your job 50% plus, you're doing well. Well, let's hope it's higher than that. But I think when you love your work and find passion in it and value and meaning and purpose, yeah, the work is work, but there's an incredible soul-filling content to it that you're proud of. You're making a difference in a way that matters. And to your point, I interviewed Bronnie Ware on her best-selling book, Top Regrets of the Dying. Read that, people. You don't want to be on your deathbed. Anyone who's I've lost both my parents at 98 and 93. You don't want to be on your deathbed having regrets. It's a terribly painful thing to be. So what I want you to do is close these gaps so you can not have regrets and truly reclaim that thrilling dream you once had. It's going to look different, but at least you're pursuing a dream and not giving up on them.
And it's so true what you say as well, in terms of the first step really is building that intimate relationship with yourself. Because many people, and I find this, personally, professionally, they can't answer some basic yet vital questions. What are your natural talents, gifts, and skills that come easily to you? What outcomes do you love supporting? How does your work stand out to others? So it's first having that level of introspection to identify what really, truly ignites that passion within you.
You are so right. And I have something called a career path self assessment. If you want to link to it, it's free. It's 11 pages. It takes time, of questions I wish someone had asked me 40 years ago. And if I'd answered them thoroughly and correctly, I don't think I would have made some of the big mistakes I made. But so every client fills it out, and I something like 75,000 people have downloaded it, and I've viewed thousands of them. When I look at it, I see things that jump off the page that people don't see themselves. But I've had a few people, not so many now, but say, that's too long. I don't want to fill that out. You don't want to take 2 hours and get to know yourself? I hate to break it to you, but it's going to be hard to build a career you love of purpose and meaning and impact if you don't want to take 2 hours with yourself. So that's a really great first step. If you're filling it out thoroughly, most likely you're going to have some revelations. Some people say, yeah, I didn't learn anything from it. Well, then I know they're very stuck, and they typically are. Like they've closed off their minds in terms of what they can do differently to be happier. But it is a great first step. You've got to know yourself intimately.
Before we end today's podcast, is there a first step anyone can take tomorrow to become a more powerful version of themselves?
I love it. Yes, I would. If first of all, take my power gap survey, see what you think. But if you have one or more, start with number one, which is not recognizing your special talents, abilities, and gifts. Do the career path assessment. But also, I did a TEDx talk, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done because it's 12 minutes without, extemporizing, here it is, and not really interacting with the audience too much. But anyway, in that, and you can link to that job if you want, I offer this exercise, the 20 facts of you. What I want you all to do is this weekend, whenever you have time, close all your devices, all the distractions, and spend an hour thinking about the 20 accomplishments and achievements you've made in your life. And I don't care if it's when I was 8 and I had a lemonade stand and it, made $2. It's not up to us to evaluate. It's what you're most proud of. Look at why and look at what are the skills that you had and talents that made that possible. Then what I want you to recognize is you have these skills and other people do not, this special amalgam. And then the question is, how do I want to leverage these more in the work I'm doing now, in the job I have, in my job search? And I promise you, if you do this honestly, you're going to have some insights that hopefully will lead to some action. And again, action is where we're going. Insight is great, but it's time to start doing something a little different than you've ever done before. And I hope that's a helpful tip.
It is. Thank you again, Kathy, for joining me on today's podcast. So appreciate your time today. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
Thank you so much for having me. I so enjoyed your deep questions. KathyCaprino.com is the best place. That's kind of my whole hub. FindingBrave.org is also my podcast. And I have 2 courses, The Most Powerful You, which is at mostpowerfulyou.com, and AmazingCareerProject.com. 2 different courses, 2 different outcomes. One is confidence, and one is building, taking the 16 amazing essential steps you have to take to build a happier career. I'd love to hear from and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear what you got out of this. That'd be great.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.